Hi guys. Yep. So I'm Savva from Crowdfunded Cures, also Public Good Pharma. My background. I'm a patent attorney and IP lawyer. Really interested in the idea of creating open source business models for uh, creating new medicines. And today I'm just going to talk about that, and particularly creating impact markets for public good medicines. So this area kind of came from my thesis that I did around 10 years ago now, particularly the problem of reliance on the patent system. Basically, if you're looking at drug development, if your drug or your intervention doesn't fit within the traditional patent model, where basically you have a composition of matter patent, and you're looking at, $2 billion at least sales within 3 years, then pharma are not interested and your drug won't get developed. So we have this problem now with the lack of productivity in pharmaceutical development, particularly in the US. There's a massive healthcare expenditures, and every new drug is now, most recently, saying around $6.3 billion for a new drug, and you're looking at sort of 10 to 15 years. So yeah, there's a significant financial toxicity. New drugs are over 200 grand median price. You've got patients getting bankrupted due to the costs of their medical costs. And also, more importantly, a lot of the new drugs that come to market are not that useful, or at least they're not, they don't have significant benefit compared to the costs being paid. And as a result, yeah, you're getting a very increased cost in pharmaceutical costs. So one of the problems is that the incentive system requires patents, and once patents run out, there's no more private incentives to do that research. So essentially, you've got a system where the patentability of a drug becomes more important than the patient benefit, which is kind of getting all the incentives in reverse. And on top of that, you've got a lot of drugs that are subject to a no-go decision, or they're just not developed because they've got insufficient patentability or commercializability. So the reason is you've got these missing incentives. Essentially, pharmaceutical companies will not develop these drugs unless they fit into that blockbuster model. So as a result, we've got a lot of therapies which are not being developed. Also, we need incentives to create to fund large clinical trials in order to influence medical practice. And there's this market failure. However, yeah, as I was saying, billions of dollars for a new drug. Repurposed drug could be developed at, say, $30 million in under 3 years, but no private incentives to do this research. So essentially, most of the drugs in use today in clinical practice are generic drugs, off-patent drugs, and finding new uses for those drugs are essentially as a public good. So there's a public good funding problem. There's also significant cost savings for use of generic drugs in the trillions of dollars. And a massive opportunity. We've got thousands of generic drugs, tens of thousands of nutraceuticals, but again, no private incentive to capture this innovation. So our solution is like using financial innovation, essentially using the cost savings that are generated by medicines in order to fund the clinical trials. So we've got two mechanisms: interventional pharmacoeconomics, which is a way of funding trials from the cost savings they generate, and then pay-for-success contracts, which then provide a private incentive to take these drugs to market independent of the ability to enforce a monopoly price. So an example would be ketamine. Ketamine is a super cheap drug. It's useful for treatment-resistant depression. There's a drug called S-ketamine, which is basically the same drug. It's arguably not as good for patients because it's it's only 54% bioavailable versus IV ketamine, which is 100% bioavailable. Just running the trial itself would only cost 80%, or even in some cases maybe 50% if you've got a synthetic control arm and an observational trial to run the trial. So essentially, from a health insurer's perspective, running the trial saves money. There's a bunch of other examples. The most famous one is Lucentis and Avastin for macular degeneration. You can prescribe Avastin off-label. It's around $20 per dose versus Lucentis, $800 per dose. Also, dose escalation trials is another big area where you can maybe dose immunotherapies like pembrolizumab and nivolumab could be effective at, say, 6% of the dose. A recent trial in India has looked at that. And also in the rare disease space, we've got a lot of opportunities, particularly where drugs are being priced so outrageously high. A lot of employers and insurers are essentially, not covering the costs of the drug because they're just charged out at sort of, in some cases, $1 million per annum. So pay for success contracts are basically like a prize. Essentially, you can incentivize the company that takes generic drug to market. They can get a price guaranteed in reward for proving that this drug works. As we've been saying before, you can get a new drug to market within 3.5 years at a fraction of the cost of traditional drug development. So a lot more efficient and to, essentially looking at how can we create incentives to create more efficiencies for drug development. Also, particularly in the sort of psychedelic space, cannabis, psilocybin, these are natural products. They're not interesting for pharma, but again, a big opportunity. We talked about ketamine. And in the longevity space, a lot of the longevity drugs are actually generic. So massive opportunities to, particularly say rapamycin, metformin, but unfortunately these drugs have almost no commercial reason to bring them to market under the current system. Why not just do grant funding? Grant funding is very inefficient, centralized. At the moment, we've got grants and, you've got scientists spending, 3 or 4 months of the year trying to apply for a grant, only 10% chance of getting the grant versus, having private incentives and having the market kind of do this research. We think NFTs are an opportunity here. What if you could have an open source pharma NFT to fund development of repurposed generic drugs? Surely this is would be better than ape pictures. So again, you can have open source pharma IP NFTs, which could be, a way of, essentially, it seems like an oxymoron, but a way of creating a private incentive to fund these kinds of public good therapies. This is actually a diagram for a medical impact DAO. This is based on ideas adapted from my thesis, but looking at and the Health Impact Fund. Essentially, that was something that also was proposed by Bernie Sanders to replace patents. We're not proposing to replace patents, but essentially you can have a prize fund that's payable, that pays out according to how well the clinical trial does. So that's us, and